next section of the manual provides information on the policies and expectations. Now, in the first section there under hours, you can see that it was made very clear to the students that they were expected to show up to the hospital between 8 and 8:30 a.m. and I did not want them to leave the hospital before 4:30 p.m. So I didn't want them disappearing in the middle of the afternoon. This made it very clear, no misunderstanding. I also wanted the students to understand that they needed to attend every day of the rotation. And if they could not attend, they needed to contact me between 8 and 8:15 or contact someone else in the pharmacy if they couldn't reach me. This type of information is very important. You can't assume that students know exactly when they should show up or when it's appropriate to leave or what they should do if they don't feel well and they're going to be absent that day. That type of information should be well spelled out and provided to the students so there are no misunderstandings. The next section of the manual that I'd like to illustrate are the learning outcomes. Now, naturally, if everything revolves around learning outcomes, we need to provide those learning outcomes to the students. Every major learning outcome of the rotation should be printed and provided to the students in the manual. Now, you can see here the first couple of learning outcomes. Right off the bat, we're talking about the fact that students are going to need to identify patient monitoring parameters that relate to the patient's problem list and or drug list, and that they're going to have to collect such data. The second learning outcome makes it very clear that they're going to have to be able to evaluate a patient's therapy and write a SOAP. So we're clarifying what the student needs to be able to do. So if there's any question about what students are going to be expected to accomplish during the rotation, the preceptor can refer the student to a clear, defined list of learning outcomes. Now, in my rotations, I always included clinical pharmacokinetics. So you can see number 8 down there toward the bottom of the slide, that they were expected to perform a pharmacokinetic analysis to adjust the dosing of the patient for drugs like aminoglycosides, phenytoin, and theophylline. Back in 1982, just about every asthmatic was taking theophylline, so there was a lot of pharmacokinetic dosing performed by pharmacists at that time. Not so much today. The next section of the manual involves clarifying responsibilities for the student. If the student understands that one of the learning outcomes is for them to be able to monitor patients during the rotation, they also need to understand what the expectations are in terms of how they go about monitoring a patient. What you can see here is that we've indicated to the students that they will be expected to closely monitor 3 to 5 patients at all times. That means if one of their patients is discharged from the hospital, they would have 24 hours to pick up a new patient. We also provide information that tells them they not only need to gather laboratory information and other relevant information about the patient using a monitoring form, but they have to write a SOAP for the patient, a SOAP note. Now, this provides for a consistency of information that we're notifying the student about. The learning outcome tells the student you do need to learn how to SOAP a patient as part of patient monitoring. These responsibilities indicate to the student that part of their responsibility is to be able to SOAP 3 to 5 patients at all times. That's the activity that they will be involved in. We would also have an assessment form that would list the criteria that would be used to evaluate the student's SOAPs. And lastly, in terms of the schedule or the calendar for the rotation, the student would know that on Thursdays, the SOAPs would be evaluated. So they know they'll have to turn in the SOAP on Thursday. So students would know on Wednesday you're going to have to make sure that you really have your SOAPs up to date. So we're providing optimal information to guide the students to success. Now, this portion of the manual includes the grading system that will be used. This is something students will certainly pay a great deal of attention to. This first part lists all the items that will be graded. Now you can see that not every aspect of the grading includes the same number of points. In this rotation, patient monitoring was much more important. It was given higher priority, 275 points, much more than all the other items. Now, there are many items on this in this rotation. I should emphasize that in 1982, at the Medical College of Ohio, these were 9-week rotations, which is even more reason to build a lot of structure into the rotation and provide a lot of information to the students, because it would have been very draining as a preceptor over 9 weeks to keep the students occupied if I didn't have everything very carefully and meticulously planned. Now, the other thing to keep in mind is that back then, as an individual preceptor, I was assigned 4 to 6 students at a time. So again, good planning was critically important, or my whole day would have been consumed overseeing the performance of students. And I had many other responsibilities to the hospital. So it emphasizes the need for this type of planning and detail in designing a rotation. The next element of grading that I'd like to emphasize, you can see above all the elements that were graded from a final exam that we mentioned in session 2, all the other elements that were graded. You can see the variability of points, and you can see that for each of these, it would have been necessary to have an assessment form to make sure that the student knew how they would be graded and what the criteria were for the evaluation. The section at the bottom is something that I would strongly recommend. It assigns a penalty for late assignments. Now, students every once in a while have a tendency to turn in an assignment a little late. That can be very disruptive within a rotation. When a preceptor is planning to be able to evaluate a student's performance on a certain day, if the student doesn't turn it in on time, that delays processes and it might interfere with the preceptor's other responsibilities. So I was very strict with students to make sure they understood it was important to turn things in on time. So I used a system of penalizing students for turning things in late. And it was very simple. Any assignment that was 1 day late would be rated at only 70% of what the student actually earned. And every day thereafter, that percentage would decrease from 70 to 60 to 50 to 40 to 30%. With this type of limitation of grading, students were very cautious to turn things in on time. And they understood what the rationale was. It was important to me that they be reliable, that they turn it in on time, and that they remain consistent to the planned schedule.